Hey guys, it's that time again. These are 4 competitive decks, the highest win rate decks in the game that I would recommend you guys play. Some of them are even budget decks that you need almost no resources to craft. Let's get started. As always, you can find the deck links for these in the pinned comment down below, and also they're all listed at tier 1 on my site's meta tier list sheet that I update weekly. Okay, let's go right ahead and get into it. These are going to be listed in no particular order here, but number 1 we've got Kinko Elusives. This is a very, very classic deck. It's seen almost no changes for the past several months. There was a Fury of the North version that was going around a bit ago, but I actually have liked it better without Fury of the North, and in particular we're running 2 Zeds. 2 Zeds, you know, it basically, you don't really want to be double drawing Zed. It also has the nice coincidence of making the deck cheaper to build, because the starter collection has 2 Zeds, which means that you don't need to craft any champions at all to build this deck. It's one of the highest win rate decks in the game, and it is an easy deck to play. The deck basically uses elusives to stop the opponent from being able to block them while you kill them. You're using Kinko Wayfinder to pull out Omen Hawk, and you're using cards like Elixir of Iron and Twin Disciplines to keep your elusives alive. Usually your finisher here is going to be Windfarer Hatchling. Out of all these lists, this is probably the easiest to play, and it's budget, so I would recommend it for basically any new player. Like I said, it is one of the top 5 performing highest win rate decks statistically in the entire game right now. Okay, next up we have Byrne Aggro. So this is Byrne Aggro, not like the Relentless Pursuit version of Aggro, and this is my version of it with the 2 Elixir of Wrath, 2 Navori Conspirator, and 2 Decimates. Okay, so basically this is the spiritual successor to Nox PNZ Byrne, but in this case we've got elusive Byrne, right, is kind of the idea behind this kind of reincarnation of the deck. Not only are we using the Nox's Byrne tools, Byrne being direct damage to face via spell or effect, those being Crimson Disciple, Imperial Demolitionist, Grenadier, Decimate, etc., plus the Ionian elusives. What they have in common is they're basically disallowing opponent blockers. So you spend the early game attacking with elusives, and when they get low enough, sometimes you kill them with elusives like Elixir, or, you know, just elusives attacking, and sometimes you're going to be killing them over the top with, you know, your boon tools, Decimate, Noxian Fervor, etc. I will say, this deck is, I wouldn't say it's a hard deck to play, but it is deceptively tricky. It is definitely harder than Kinko Elusives, and it is also definitely harder, a bit harder, than the Nox PNZ Byrne Aggro, the old one with PNZ, right? So what that's going to mean is this is still a deck that I would recommend to new players if you're interested in it. You'll notice that, like the last deck we did, this is also a budget deck. This deck runs no champions, just like the last deck, the Zeds being in the starter collection, right? So what that means is that it's great, it's a nice cheap deck, it's not that hard to play, but it is going to be harder than Kinko Elusives. You're going to have to make a lot of sort of very tight decisions, because with this deck, single mistakes will kind of be costing you games reliably. However, the one upside is this is the fastest deck in this entire list. You'll never get games faster than this, which means, you know, if you can play it even decently, not even super well, you're going to have the highest ladder gains per hour. I should mention that this list comes in on the stats at a hyper ridiculous 63% win rate. Absolutely monstrous, really, really stupid stuff. Okay, next up we have this deck that I've actually been working on for the past day or so that I've actually been really, really liking. This is my new version of Keg Control. This is based off of a concept BBG had, which was Gangplank plus Thresh, although mine actually ended up surprisingly different. So basically, the idea of Keg Control is like a Shadow Isles control deck. We're using a lot of the slow Shadow Isles tools, Vile Feast, you know, Withering Will, Grasp of the Undying, just like the slow the game down tools, and we're combining that with Kegs, Deckhand, and the newly buffed Petty Officer. The gimmick here is that we're using Thresh. Kegs count as deaths, which means they level up Thresh, as well as Monkey Idol, which triggers a bunch of deaths. So Thresh is going to be flipping quite quickly, and he's going to be pulling out Gangplank too. Now, this is a deck that I currently have listed on my site as tier 1. I think this is a very good deck, and it's a great answer to an aggressive meta. In the first early days of a new meta, of a new patch in a card game, you're always going to encounter, especially when you are playing ranked, a very aggro-dense meta. So what that means is that there's kind of a gap in the market for an anti-aggro deck, and that's what I made this version of this concept for. Which is this is my anti-aggro deck for this patch. If you are sick of basically seeing these aggro decks and you want to counter to them, this is exactly what I would recommend. It has all the benefits of Shadow Isles in the form of like Whale, Vile Feast, Grasp. This version's running 1, but I might go back to 2 depending on how it goes. But without any of the other things that usually make Shadow Isles really slow. Like when you compare this to Deep decks, for example, Deep just has a lot of really slow tools that, even though the Shadow Isles component of Deep is really good against aggro, the rest of it is really terrible to the point where overall it's kind of like net even against aggro, right? This deck will blast aggro, and for that, I think it's great right now. I will say one caveat. I suspect that in a week and a half, my site will list this deck as tier 2. I don't think this will stay tier 1, but it's very powerful. It's very, I would say it's challenging in a fun way. It's not super difficult. You don't need to be a Megamind to play the deck, but there's a lot of cool, tricky plays you can do, and it will lead to slightly longer games if you're up for that. In fact, much longer games than the last 2 decks, which were basically both aggro decks. And then lastly, we've got Heimer Vi. Now, Heimer Vi is a deck that's very interesting. It comes in on the stats actually notably much higher win rate in Masters than in non-Masters, which basically, can mean a few things, but in this case it means the obvious, which is that this deck is a bit tricky to play, right? Very tricky to play. It's like 5% win rate differential, which is really big. That's absolutely massive. That's like an entire tier, maybe like a tier and a half. So what that means is that this is a tricky deck. It is going to be a bit of a challenge. Misplays will cost you games. It will lead to longer games. There's a lot of room to make mistakes. And particularly, you'll have to do a few potentially counterintuitive things. You really need to be floating mana with this deck. Floating means sending to spell mana, making sure you have like excess mana reserves so that you have the ability to protect your Heimerdinger. So you will be burning mana to float mana. Like think of spots where you have like 4 total mana sitting on an option. You don't take the option. You burn 1 so that you can float float the 3, right? That kind of thing. And that's going to be a really important kind of mentality for, playing this deck. There's a lot of things you're going to have to do. You're going to have to really try to protect your Heimer, play him when he's safe, keep him alive, and then just kind of like know in general how to use your counter spells. Not just like Deny as a counter spell, but like stuff like Will of Ionia countering whatever the opponent might be doing at any given time. So overall, it's a high win rate deck. It's a good deck. It's not going to be a bad deck, and it's going to be good in this meta right now because you run a lot of elusives. So you're good against like the elusive aggro decks. But what it does mean is that if you're up for a challenge, I'd recommend the deck. Absolutely. If you're thinking about crafting like these champions and you're not sure, I would probably stick to one of the others if you're just like really on the fence and you're not sure if it's going to work out well for you, because statistically this deck doesn't have an absolutely amazing time in non-Masters ladder. Okay. So those are the 4 decks that I would recommend right now. There's one kind of like final point that I'm going to make. A lot of people are asking, well, Swim, there's actually 5 decks listed as tier 1 on your website's tier list right now. The 5th of which, these are the 4 other ones, right? The ones I just listed. The 5th of which being Byrne Aggro. Why isn't Byrne Aggro here? The reason is pretty simple. It's basically just a worse version of elusive Byrne. It's going to have kind of all the same matchups. It's gonna cost a champion if you need to craft Teemo, and yeah, I guess it's a little bit easier to play, but if you want something easier, I'd go for Kinko elusives. So Byrne Aggro is a decent choice as well, but it's not something that I would necessarily like really recommend right now, but it does come in well in the stats, so if you're comfortable on it, yeah, go ahead, stick with it. And yeah, that's it for this video. That's the video. That is 4, I guess kind of 5, 4 decks that I think basically all of you will be able to find a deck in these 4. They cover a variety of like different playstyles, different speeds, different difficulties, different amounts of like crafting materials required, that within these 4 decks, you should be able to find one deck that you really like. Alright guys, that's it. That's all I got. See ya.